I'm LaVern Vivio from the Blaze TV. And you know, when I first started this series, this Wide Awake series, I said that for us to be truly wide awake for what we have ahead of us, we got to wake up our faith. And to do that, we have to educate ourselves that there's another side to that. A lot of people like to dismiss it as coincidence, karma, just things happening. I don't believe in coincidence. I believe that when your faith is truly wide awake, God will show up and show out in your life. And I have an example. It actually started in an office right across there on my very second day here at the Blaze. I had just been hired. And when I got into the office, I was talking to one of our managers. I found out they hadn't yet hired my co-host. He said, "Do you know anybody?" Well, at first I didn't. I mean, we were talking about needing somebody that was going to come to Dallas. I couldn't think of anybody. And so we went on and started talking about something else, and then all of a sudden the name popped into my head, Brad Staggs. Brad and I had worked together 20 years ago in Nashville, and we'd always joked that we would have loved to eventually done a morning show or something together. It just never happened. He left and went into television, and I told him, I said, you know, if Brad's available, he's your guy. Well, we Googled his name, and immediately stuff started popping up. He's been on DIY HGTV, and he has a program called Tool School. You know, I hadn't seen Brad in about 10 years, and I think it had actually been the last time I saw him was at a Glenn Beck event. Finally, Brad called me later that night. We didn't take time to really catch up at that point. I told him, I said, "You need to call Greg," and he did. He called me back a couple hours later. They had already made plans to fly him into Dallas the next day. And then he told me about an amazing coincidence that, well, let's just let him tell you.
You know, I think one of the biggest lessons I've ever had to learn in life is actually asking for help. And, you know, the ultimate, of course, when you're asking for help is prayer. I was in a low spot. I was, you know, it takes sitting at the bottom of the barrel to appreciate being at the top of the barrel. And for whatever reason, and this was on a Saturday, for whatever reason, I'd had it. I was done. And I stood up and I threw my arms up in the air and I said, "Okay, God, I can't do it by myself. I don't know how to do it. I can't do it. I don't know what to do. I need help." On Monday, the phone rings and it's LaVern, and I answered. And she said, "Hey, what are you doing these days?" And I said, "Well, I'm working." I listed off everything I was doing. I was working very hard. But as Mike Rowe says, you've got to work hard and smart. And I listed off a string of jobs, but still the ends of the rope weren't meeting. And she said, "Well, I don't know if you know what I'm doing now." I said, "No." She says, "Well, I'm at the Blaze." And I said, "Well, that's great. That's good for you." And she said, "Well, now, do you know who Glenn Beck is?" Yeah, I know who Glenn Beck is. Well, how do you feel about him?" I said, "I love Glenn." But she said, "Look, they're listening for somebody else, or they're looking for somebody else to do these live commercials with me, with LaVern. And I want you to call these two guys." So I did.
So the very next day, Brad joins me in that office, and we're sitting there for a couple hours waiting for his audition. And we talk about that coincidence and how amazing God's timing is in our lives.
On Wednesday, I was here in the studio, in this very studio, right down there where Glenn's desk normally sits. And the bottom line is, here I am. Been here for several months now, and like LaVern says, it's a dream job. But again, the lesson in the whole thing is you have to ask for help. You have to be able to accept help from others, to accept help from God. And sometimes if you're so stubborn that you don't or won't do that, yeah, I think that sometimes that hand comes down and just slaps you upside the back of the head. Fortunately, I have a pretty tough head. But here I am in Dallas at the Blaze with LaVern. If you told me this 8 months ago, I would have told you you're crazy.
And that started us talking about the ministry that I do, Christian and Creation Evidence. And one of the first questions that he asked me was, "How do you think the earth is?" You know, he has that perception that a lot of people do, that all Christians think that the earth is only 6,000 to 10,000 years old. Well, I gave him the answer, and I actually cover it in the Constitution of Faith, that free PDF download that I'll give you the link to, so check it out. And I'll explain it all in there. And as a matter of fact, we're going to get into that and a whole lot more as we continue with this Wide Awake series. Next time, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of my personal experiences with how God has showed up and showed out in my life and just showed his amazing timing. And I'm also going to tell you how that kind of ties in with the way I completely ripped off my boss, Glenn Beck, for a good idea and how it took on a life of its own. So join me next time for Wide Awake. God bless and lots of Dio, y'all.